it seemed like whenever there was a bad season, oftentimes my scapegoat would be, well, those seniors, the senior group just had bad leadership, just a bad group of seniors. And I seem to really lean on that as one of my reasons for not succeeding in the win-loss column. And after another time doing it, I kind of had this like self-realization that this is my fault, right? This is my fault that the seniors aren't leading or don't know what leadership is.
Welcome to another episode of the Cornerstone Coaching Academy podcast, where you will get expert, practical baseball coaching advice you can take directly to your next practice. Let's get started. Here's your host, Coach Kyle Nelson.
All right, coaches, welcome to another episode of the Cornerstone Coaching Academy podcast. I'm your host, Coach Kyle Nelson. We have a little bit of a different show for you this week, not something that I usually do. However, as I'm going through my journey of trying to better myself as a coach and trying to find some ways that I can improve myself and some of the things that I'd like to do, I do oftentimes want to share those with you. And today we actually have a guest on the program, and that is Joel Pelland. Joel is the head baseball coach at Glenbard East High School, and he also runs the Peak Performance Chicago, which is a mental skills peak performance company. And we are really fortunate to have Joel on the program today, as it is one of the areas that I'm trying to learn about and I'm trying to get better at. And so I thought, as I'm having this discussion with Joel about some of the things that I can do, I might as well record it and share it with you guys. So a little bit about how you can get in contact with Joel. You can check out his website at peakperformancechi.com. On Twitter, he is at peakperformance_CHI. Instagram is Joel Pelland Peak Performance, and on LinkedIn he is at Joel Pelland. So if you like what you listen to here today, please get in contact with him. The normal format from the show that you will hear most Mondays is going to be about a 15 to 20 minute discussion from me about some of the things that have been going on and things I've been thinking about, and trying to get one really specific piece of information out to you, something very actionable that you can take back to your team. This interview certainly does fit that. This is very actionable, and I think you're going to get a lot out of it. So here is our interview with Joel Pelland of Peak Performance Chicago. All right, Cornerstone listeners, this is Coach Kyle Nelson here. We have a special guest on today's podcast. It is Joel Pelland. Joel works with Time Leadership and Peak Performance, and they do leadership, mental skills coaching with high school, college, and travel ball teams. One of the reasons I brought Joel on is I think that he has a really unique perspective on a lot of leadership, on a lot of culture building, on a lot of team building things. I've seen him talk. I have a good relationship with Joel, and it's one of the areas that I really feel like I can improve on in my coaching as well. And so I wanted to bring him on to share our conversation with you, but also I'm hoping to learn quite a bit from him as well. So I'll ask Joel. Joel, how are you doing today?
Great, Kyle. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Why don't you give our listeners just a little bit of a background into what it is that you're doing, and then also kind of like why you think that this is such an important part of team building, and what kind of made you, you talked in one of your talks that I heard about a mindset shift that happened with you, kind of away from just simply coaching and teaching the game and into kind of teaching life and teaching leadership to kids and things like that.
Yeah, no problem. So this kind of all derived from coaching experience that I had when it seemed like whenever there was a bad season, oftentimes my scapegoat would be, well, those seniors, the senior group just had bad leadership, just a bad group of seniors. And I seem to really lean on that as one of my reasons for not succeeding in the win-loss column. And after another time doing it, I kind of had this like self-realization that this is my fault, right? This is my fault that the seniors aren't leading or don't know what leadership is. And so I kind of started this journey on improving myself as a leader and as a coach, and learning how to develop leaders inside my program, because I was finding that kids were coming in and we use all the leadership words and we tell them to be leaders, but they didn't really know what that was. And so now I'm a little bit more intentional with teaching leadership qualities, attributes, what it looks like. and then processing my guys through what that is.
Yeah. So we've all kind of had that same realization, right? Like you're a high school coach like me, public high school, you can't recruit,
Right.
you've got what you've got when they come in. Talk to me a little bit about what it looks like when you get a new group of seniors or a new group of kids that you want to teach this leadership, your leadership stuff to. What does that process look like? Kind of an overview of that. What are some of the things that you really think are important in order to get across to them to turn them into the leaders on your team?
One of the things that we do is we started a leadership class at our school for our program, and the kids sign up for it. They commit to it. It's 1 or 2 times a month in the morning before school, and we have different topics that we talk about with leadership. The biggest one I feel is, or the biggest two I should say, is what is leadership, and then different leadership traits or different leadership styles, I should say. And because a lot of kids, they don't really know what leadership is, and so we take a whole lesson and we just talk about what that is, and then we start going into different styles of leadership, because I think a lot of times when people think of leader, they think of, Michael Jordan or Tom Brady or William Wallace and Braveheart, and they feel like that they have to be these really big, vocal, lead the charge type of guys, when that's not the case at all. So we kind of walk them through and step them through, what it looks like, what it means, and what leadership style might best fit them personally.
What are some of those? Can you give us a couple examples of just like what are some of those leadership styles, and then maybe what kind of kid might fit those roles or that type of leadership for your team?
Yeah, the main two I would say is the vocal leader, right? The guy who's willing to get in front of, hold people accountable, and get in front of them and kind of be able to confront teammates on certain things. A lot of guys don't like confrontation, so we know who those guys are. But the big one is the guys that are quiet, and being a servant, right, and serving your team is one of the big things that we talk about with those guys. Like, you can lead by example, and you can lead by serving those around you, and that's going to go a long way with your teammates in building trust and continuity and togetherness and connecting when we look to serve each other.
How many kids, in a given year come into your program and are like, I'm that vocal leader? Like, is that something that you have to draw out of kids, or is that something that as they go through the class, it's like, hey, this can be me, or I can be that? Or do you have some kids that are already kind of that way, and then you just kind of give them permission to be that way?
Yeah, I would say more of the latter. I think the vocal leaders know that they're vocal. I think the one that strikes home with a lot of the student athletes that I work with is the ones that aren't necessarily starters, or the ones that maybe are starters, but they're kind of, end of the lineup guys, and they're not in the top 4 in the lineup, or they're not our number 1, 2, or 3 on the mound. I think those guys that are outside of those roles really kind of start to see, like, wow, like I can really have an impact on my team and my teammates and my season by doing this. And I think that's where the light bulb goes on with a lot of guys, are the ones that aren't really sure if they're leaders or not, and then kind of that light bulb turn on. Because when we define leadership with our guys, we define it as influence. And we talk about how everybody on our team, in our program, can have influence on others. And I think it's those guys that really kind of start to get it and start to kind of roll with that.
What does a leadership class look like for you guys? So, kids sign up for this class, and then, like, what are some of the things that you do in the class to help them either become more leaders, or just kind of bring out what they already naturally have?
So we do a lot of leadership attribute training. So so what we'll do is we'll come in the classroom, and we'll talk about the main topic that is going to be covered that day. And it might be integrity, right? And so we'll define integrity. We'll talk about it. I found, especially with this generation of players, the more video you can find to back up what you're trying to explain, the more they get it. I don't know why, but it's where they're at. They everything's through their phones, everything's through their iPads, and like kids would rather text you than call you and talk to you in person because that's how they communicate right now. And I try to do a lot of communication through video. So we'll we'll bring up the topic. We'll talk a little bit about it. We'll throw out some examples. We'll show some videos. We'll have some small group discussion. After the small group discussion on some different questions, we'll bring it to the whole group and we'll kind of share out different things that we thought about. I like to do a lot of self-assessing and self-evaluating. So I either find evaluations or assessments online or I make them myself. And they're just, a lot of times they're just simple: circle 1 through 5, add up your score at the end, see what, where your strengths and weaknesses are. Because I think that's another thing that is huge, just in life in general, is being aware of where you're at, right? Being aware of where you're at in relationships with people, and attributes with yourself, and your physical abilities. And so we do a lot of self-assessing.
Yeah, that's I think that's huge with kids is they're not very good sometimes at realizing the things they're good at and the things they're not good at. And so I really like that, and I think that that's one thing that I would like to do more with our players, not only off the field but on the field as well. Do you find that helps them on the field a little bit? Like, you've got a kid you teach him how to self-assess a little bit in the classroom, and then he gets, he's an infielder and he's able to see the things he's good at and not, or is that able to translate onto the field in terms of skills?
That's a great question. I don't know if I've actually ever looked for that in particular, but as you mention it, there's some things that have played out in our program over the last couple of years that I think it's got to play out a little bit into it. So one of the things in our program is we like to give our guys a lot of freedom. We have our plans and our approaches just like every other program, but we give them a lot of freedom on the base paths, and they need to know what kind of runner they are. They need to know who's on the mound, who's behind the plate. There's a lot of things that they have to evaluate with that freedom, and I've found that is really translated in our running game. I don't know if there's a direct correlation or not, but as you bring that's the first thing that pops in my head with that question is the ability to self-assess their own physical limitations. What kind of, because we have a couple of different systems, like what kind of lead do I have to take? What kind of jump do I have to get in order to steal this bag? And I got to imagine that there's some relationship. I just don't know how direct it is.
Yeah, that's one of those things that would be almost impossible to measure, just be kind of an anecdotal thing that you might notice. One of the other things you do is you do like peak performance training.
Mm-hmm.
So talk a little bit about what peak performance means to you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. That's one of my favorite questions, actually. So in my journey, I've kind of broken it down to 6 pillars of peak performance. So I have the skill work, right? The acquisition, the repetition, the practicing stuff. There's sport IQ, and then there's strength and conditioning. Those are the first 3 pillars. And those are the ones that get focused on a lot in the weight room, in practice, in different situational drills with coaches in all sports, not just baseball. And then I believe that there's another 3 pillars: mental skills, leadership, and lifestyle. I think that all 6 of these have to be lined up for that player, regardless of what sport they're in, to give themselves the best chance to be the best version of themselves in competition.
Dive just a little bit deeper into some of those. And, like, for example, like lifestyle, you talk about lifestyle, like what are the things that you're looking for with your players as far as lifestyle that can help them perform not only on the baseball field, but in class and life and that kind of thing.
So there's a lot of things that fall into that, but the main ones, and I want to give credit to one of my mentors, Dr. John Underwood. He runs Human Performance Project, and I have learned a ton from him, and he's, given me a ton of his information and work, and so I'm very grateful for him. But in the lifestyle aspect of things, we really come from a science-based approach on alcohol, marijuana, vaping, sleep and sleep quality and amount of sleep, and you got nutrition in there, you've got stress in there, because all of those things, lifestyle wise, take an impact on the central nervous system. And when it comes down to it, performance is all about central nervous system readiness, and how alert and how ready is your central nervous system to fire the signals that need to be fired to accomplish the task that needs to be accomplished. And so I work with my players on that, but that's another thing that I do when I talk to other schools, colleges and high schools and players, is sometimes I'll come in, I'll just talk just on sleep for half hour to 45 minutes, because it's so deep. And I really think sleep is if there was a magical pill that was completely natural and completely legal, and I said, hey, if you can take this pill, it's completely legal, natural, it'll make you a better player. It won't break any training code, nothing. And most people would be like, well, yeah, I'll take that if it's going to make me better. I would consider sleep being that pill. We could have a whole nother podcast just on sleep.
It is such a big thing. And that's, that's one of the things that I've started to take into account when I'm putting together my practice schedule for the season and looking at our game schedule and our players' workload. I don't know about you guys. What time do you guys start school?
We start school at 7:30.
Okay, so we start at 7:15.
Right.
And they moved us up from, when I started teaching there, we were at 8:00, and now we're at 7:15, right? And so we're trying to cram these extra minutes into the school day. And I look at our kids and I'm like, okay, let's say we have late practice, we have our space is late. It's till 9:00 at night. And these kids have to turn around and be awake at 6:15 in the morning, ready to go for school by 7:15. And, when you're dealing with a schedule like that, it's just it's really hectic, right?
Yes.
Try to find the sleep that you need. What are some of the things, like tips and things like that? Because I do think sleep is incredibly important. I know I track my own sleep on my fitness tracker, and I get between 5 and 6.5 hours of sleep a night.
Yeah.
Summertime, it's like 7. I feel great. In the school year, I wake up, I feel like a zombie. Like, what are some of the things that you talk to your players about, or to some of the people you consult with? It's about how to work that into your schedule and how to make that a little bit more front forward in your life.
Yeah. Well, the first part is that you got to make sleep a priority. Sleep has got to be considered part of your training. And the biggest thing with sleep is, well, for you and I, because we're older, we can get away with a little bit less sleep. And it's not that people can't function on less sleep.
Right.
It's that they can't perform optimally on less sleep.
Correct.
And that's an important difference to note, is that you can function on very limited hours of sleep, but you can't perform optimally. And I think about myself as a coach, as a teacher, as a speaker and presenter, and as a father. Like, I'm much better at what I do in all those categories when I've gotten my sleep. And, when I don't have my sleep, cortisol levels increase, stress levels increase, you're more short-tempered, and all that stuff matters. But I would say for the high school kids, if there's one thing that coaches should take back, it's 9 hours and 15 minutes. That's the magic number for hours that anyone from the age 13 to 24 needs for their brain to have a complete 4 REM cycles of sleep at night and really get everything that they can out of that sleep. Is 9 hours and 15 minutes.
Yeah, man, there's just so much working against them in that. Like, that's
and that's just kind of where we're at culturally too, right? It's do more, sleep less. People say, well, I'll sleep when I'm dead. And well, that's ridiculous, because there's also research out there that shows that people who sleep more live longer.
Yeah.
And so it's really kind of countercultural to how our society is now, but it's absolutely instrumental if they want to get everything they want out of their athletic careers.
Do you talk about, and this is a little bit off topic, but it's not really, do you talk about device usage with your in this at all? Because, like, when I'm thinking about like sleep and like productivity and stuff like that, that to me has got to be like one of the biggest thing that kills sleep, kills productivity, stuff like that with young people. And I don't know if you touch on that at all or not, or. No,
I do. We talk about, the light that's given off, and I think there's what college was it? Oklahoma State. Their football team actually mandated that anybody looking at a screen for their football program, anybody looking at a screen after 7 p.m., they bought blue light blocking glasses for their whole program.
Hmm.
I said, you got to wear these because that blue light from the screens, kind of tricks the part of our brain that tells us that we should be awake to staying awake when we should be sleeping. Like, I don't know if anybody's done camping. I know, we talked earlier, you kind of, go off and do some vacationing up in Michigan. I know when I go out to my father-in-law's cabin and I don't have my phone doesn't work. I don't get cell reception. There's no TV out there. I mean, in his cabin, there's no running water. You got to pump it. But I find that when the sun goes down, I start to get tired. And that's the natural circadian rhythm of our bodies kind of starting to work and say, all right, the different chemical levels are where they're at. The sun's going down. The brain's saying, all right, I got to be going to sleep soon. But we're stimulated so much by computer screens and TVs and phones that our bodies stay up later than, we trick it. But the blue light tricks our brain. And so, I mean, I always recommend that, you try to stay away from the screen. Well, the real thing is about 2 hours before bedtime, but I know it's not super realistic for a lot of people. But if you can give an hour before you go to bed to just be screen free, whether you're getting ready for school the next day, whether you decide to read a book, or maybe you do your homework at that time, and that kind of will start to slow your brain down a little bit and calm all the activity there and allow you to get into the right part of sleep at the right time. Because with the screens, you might fall asleep physically, but your brain is still very much active with what it was all processing and taking in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm guilty of that. I do work late at night. It's on a computer, and then I try to lay down, and it's like you just can't shut your brain off.
Yeah.
So I might get 6 or 7 hours of sleep, but the first hour or two of that is like
the quality is what's being compromised.
right. And man, I think that's so important, like rest, recovery, all that stuff with our players. I really think that as like, and this will be like one part of my next question, but I really feel like as a newer coach, as a younger coach, I always felt like just push the gas. 3-hour practice is better than 2. Practice on Saturday for 4 hours is better than 3, and just constantly pushing. And then as you go through, you kind of find that your performance levels dip because of how hard you've pushed and how much you've tried to squeeze out of that, out that team. So
for sure.
So a lot of our listeners are high school and travel coaches, and a lot of them maybe are changing jobs or with a new team, or, like a travel coach will have, some of their team leave, some of their team come in. Give some advice to like, first-time coaches or coaches with a new team, how they can go about building a culture, like a positive culture, and the kind of team that you would hope to develop through your leadership training and peak performance training.
Right. So, as far as culture goes, it's super important that coaches pay attention to the culture of their programs, because if you don't intentionally try to shape it, it's going to create itself. And oftentimes it's going to create itself not the way that we want it. I like the analogy that culture is like soil. It's got to be taken care of. It's got to be cultivated. It's got to be attended to every day. And it's what makes your program, right? It's what gives you your program identity. And the culture, I gave that talk last year. It's a competitive advantage. At my school that I'm at, we don't get, the D1 guy too often, the big 87 to 90 mile an hour arm. So I knew that we needed something to try to help give us a leg up so we can compete with those types of teams. And it wasn't right away. So I don't want to act like I've always had it all together. I still don't have it all together. But I'm constantly trying to learn on how we can gain an advantage for our program to compete with bigger, more talented programs, and how can we compete with them, beat them. And culture is definitely one of the things that we've kind of really poured ourselves into. I've had great buy-in from my coaching staff, very blessed with the coaches that I have. Because at the end of the day, like you said before, when new coaches, they come in, they want to put the pedal to the metal, they want to do all these things. Um, you gotta make sure you surround yourself with a group of good guys that you trust, that you can empower, because that's where you'll start to see growth. The more I tried to micromanage, the more kind of exhausted I got, and the more freedom I gave to my coaches, the more I was able to focus on other aspects of our program, of our culture, and just trust my coaches to do what I've hired them to do.
You mentioned a few things last year when I saw you speak, of like some specific things you did with your team that you thought were really beneficial. And they were a little bit, I mean, to be honest with you, like some of the things you mentioned that I recall, I was sitting in the audience and I'm kind of like, man, I just can't see myself doing that. What are some of those things, like some of those really specific things you did that you thought had a big impact on your team, on your culture?
All right. Yeah, thanks. So one of the big things that we do is team building. And that's what I do with my time leadership and peak performance business. I do leadership workshops. I do team building workshops, but I don't do that with my own guys. I bring out somebody else to do it with my guys, because I think that it's really important for them to get similar messages from other voices. I think the more they hear it from different people, the more convicted and convinced they are that what we're doing is the right thing. And so I don't run the team building sessions. I do some, but the main big ones, I bring in other people to do that with my team, because I think it's that important. Because I think all coaches know, you and I definitely know, when you're talking to your team, sometimes it turns into the Charlie Brown teacher voice, and it's just wah 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 wah. And they stop listening. And so the more you can bring in and surround them with other people, the best. So some of the other things that we do, we've gone laser tagging as a group. I think most coaches have at least done the bowling thing once or twice. One of the things that we've started to do this year is we're teaching everybody in our program how to play chess. Chess is very similar to baseball when you think about the mental part of it. You make a bad move and you've got to recover from it. You've got to see multiple moves ahead, just like when you're out in your position. You got to see if the ball's hit here, here's where I'm going. If the ball's hit here, the ball's hit up, down, and all these different situations. You got to play through your head really quickly. And so chess kind of brings out that mentality, but it also allows teammates to compete against each other, and then also connect. And that's what I'm trying to do with a lot of like the games and things like that. When we got snow one year, 4 days into our season when we were setting up our fence.
Happens like every year.
I know. But instead of going back in and practicing, we went out to the trunk of my car. I pulled out a football, and they just played football in the snow for like 25 minutes, 30 minutes. And then we called it a day, because kids don't play anymore. They don't. They don't play with each other. And when we were all growing up, we would meet at a park, we would play, we would fight, we would compete, we would win, we would lose, and we would connect with these kids that we're growing up with. And I found that there's just not that same connection anymore with, kids as they come in. And I'm trying to create those connections. I'm trying to create those collisions where they have to deal with things and they have to figure things out on their own, because they're not doing it anymore when they're younger. And so as they're coming up in our program, I want them to have, different things that have connected them and brought them together. I do a senior dinner. I bring the seniors over to my house and we sit down and we have a pasta dinner. My wife makes, pasta dinner. I make the garlic bread. I make really good garlic bread. But my wife pretty much does everything else, and I'm very blessed with my wife wanting to do that. But we sit down and we have a family style dinner and we talk about the season. We talk about expectations. We talk about, because seniors are important to programs, no matter what role they're in. They're kids that have oftentimes been in your program all 3 years and they're going to their fourth one. And it's important that we communicate openly, honestly, and that we're all on the same page as we go forward.
I think one of the things you said was like, you're getting your kids to know each other a little bit. And I think that's really important for the high school coach, because like, I don't know about where you're at, but our kids, we have one we have one league that's kind of dedicated to our district, but then we also have, a handful of kids that play outside of there. And
Mm-hmm.
so when the first time they play together, maybe high school baseball, I don't know if you experienced that same thing, but like you're kind of bringing together a whole bunch of different kids who have different experiences and different travel programs into one place and trying to, build them together and mesh them and get them to
Mm-hmm.
work together.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something that I think a lot of high schools face now, especially with the amount of travel baseball that's out there. Not that there's anything bad about travel baseball. There's just a lot of teams, and so a lot of players play on different teams, and then they come together in high school.
Yeah, we've been
Um,
playing together since we were like 12 when I got to high school. Like we were the
y-
same group of kids
yes, yep, yeah.
playing together since we were like 12.
hmm One of the main things that I do, trying to connect kids on a deeper level, is we tier it, right. We don't go in with the deep stuff right away, but we start creating vulnerability in our program, and we start kind of peeling back layers of our lives and sharing these things. And I do this with my team, and I do it in the seminars or workshops that I do with other teams, and there's a systematic way to just kind of start peeling back little things. But I'll tell you what, if that's something that you're going to implement or want to implement, it's important that you're willing to be vulnerable first, right? The leader has to be vulnerable first. And so I'm very open with my players on some of the downfalls and things that have happened in my life, um, because it's important for them to see that in me and know that, hey, you know what, coach is human. Coach has gone through, some hard times, and then it leaves them a little bit more comfortable to share. I mean, I've had people share about, deaths in the family that they've, really blamed on themselves, and different family illnesses. And I've had kids up in the front of the classroom sharing their stuff, and they're crying, and their teammates are like, "We're here for you, man. Like we're not going anywhere. Like we got you." And like that, just that you can feel it. You can feel it in the air. The atmosphere, the feeling in that room is just one of love. And hey, we're keeping this with us, but we've got your back. And that just, it's a huge thing that we do, is just that systematic, peeling back layers and just sharing a little bit about us, each and every, team meetings and stuff like that. We probably do that, one or two times a week, especially in the in the preseason, before we start playing games. Intentional about, hey, who are we? Let's get to know each other a little bit more. And again, the leaders got to go first, got to be vulnerable first.
That's got to be so huge for kids who come from, a disadvantaged background or have, problems at home or something like that. Like they may not have that place to go.
Yeah,
Where they can talk about things.
And I agree, and I even think it's something that the kids who are privileged and seem like they have it all together, they have or have to act like they have it all together all the time. It gives them an environment to say, I'm really, I don't have it all together. I know I act like I do, but I'm a mess, and here's why. And then it just really allows them to breathe and kind of let that weight that they're carrying around just kind of down, and know that, their teammates are there for them regardless.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, like I said, that's got to be hugely powerful for a lot of kids. So we are about out of time. I'll turn it over to you. Just if there's anything you want to talk about or mention to our audience before we head out, go ahead, take a couple minutes and do that.
Well, first off, I'd like to thank you again for having me on, and just thank the listeners out there for listening through the whole way. I really appreciate it. My goal in life is simple, and that's just to try to impact and influence as many lives as possible. That's the main reason why I started what I did. I had some issues and testimonies in my own life and my own career that didn't pan out, and I want to make sure that other kids that are going through athletics can't look back and say, I regret this, or I didn't know about that, or I didn't hear about that. And so I want to get out there to those kids and try to impact as many lives as I can. And then any advice that I have for coaches, it's pretty simple, and it applies to me and you and everybody that's listening, is leaders are humble. And what I mean by humble is leaders have the ability to learn from anybody. It doesn't matter if you're an old coach learning from a young new coach, or the other way around. Doesn't matter if it's a senior learning from a freshman. That's one of the things that I really try to drive home with my guys. It's something that I try to drive home when I'm talking to coaches, is that leaders are humble, and humble leaders can learn from anybody. And then, like I had said before, don't be afraid to empower others, empower your assistant coaches, empower other people to come in and systematically touch your program and build your program. And then my last thing I would say is leaders are readers. I am a true believer that if you want to be the best coach that you possibly can, or best whatever, whether it's a father, whether it's a businessman or woman, you got to have the desire and hunger to want to get better each and every day. So I always say never stop learning and never stop growing. Just try to soak in as much as you can.
All right, Joel, thanks so much for your time. If you are interested in getting in touch with Joel, he runs the Time Leadership and Peak Performance. His email is timetolead2017@gmail.com. His website is www.yourtime2lead.com. On Twitter, you can follow him at time_leaders_pp. And on Instagram, he is at Joel Pelland Peak Performance. Quite honestly, I do mostly solo shows. I don't do many interviews. I'm glad I had John, because like I said, this is an area I need to improve on and get better on. And I really don't go back and listen once I record the show. I record it and I put it out there, and if I need to edit it, I do that a little bit. But I'm definitely going to go back and listen to this one. A lot of good tidbits on there for coaches, a lot of good things that you can start implementing directly into your individual program. So everyone, thanks a lot for being with us this week. We will be back next week with another episode of the Cornerstone Coaching Academy podcast, and never stop learning. So real quick, in between the recording of this video and the airing of this video, Joel actually did rebrand his company, and so I wanted to make sure that you got those changes here. They were at the beginning, but you can find his website at peakperformancechi.com. On Twitter, find Joel at peakperformance_CHI. Instagram is Joel Pelland Peak Performance. So I hope that you got as much out of that interview as I did. Have a wonderful week. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Cornerstone Coaching Academy podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Cornerstone Coaching Academy podcast. If you liked what you heard here and you're looking to take your team, your program, and your coaching career to the next level, there is no better resource than a Cornerstone Elite membership. Get everything you need to run an amateur team, including dozens of drills, games, practice plans, e-courses, and much more, right at your fingertips, wherever you have an internet connection. Check it out today at cornerstonecoachingacademy.com/cornerstone-elite. We will be back next week with another great episode on the Cornerstone Coaching Academy podcast.